She's lying next to you, not just with her body, but with her silence. The room is dim. She's scrolling. You're scrolling. She sighs a little more often these days, laughs a little less. She still kisses you goodbye in the morning, but it's more of a habit than a hunger. And when you reach for her, genuinely hoping to reignite something, it doesn't land. She pulls away gently, politely, as if she doesn't want to hurt your feelings, as if she's trying to protect something fragile, or maybe you, maybe the connection, maybe herself. You wonder, when did she stop wanting you like she used to? But here's the question I want to ask you. What makes a woman want? Not just sexually, not just physically, but emotionally, long before her body even considers opening itself. What awakens her mind? What nourishes her trust? What makes her feel like this relationship is a home she wants to walk back into, not a duty she's quietly checking off? You see, most men are taught to show love through doing, fixing things, providing, staying loyal. But many women fall in love through feeling seen, through the little acts that say, I still notice you, I still choose you. You matter to me even when you're not asking for anything. And those little acts, they're not overtly sexual. They don't require lingerie or a hotel room or even a bed, but they are the foreplay of emotional closeness. And emotional closeness is often the true gateway to a woman's deepest arousal. Let me take you into her world for a second. She's had a long day, endless Zoom calls, a boss who micromanages, a friend going through a divorce. She gets home and the dishes are still in the sink. The kids are wild. You're tired too. So you retreat a little, scroll a little, maybe say, you okay? She says, I'm fine. But she's not. Inside, she's craving a moment of being held without having to ask, of being seen without explaining herself, of being touched not just because you want sex, but because you missed her. That space, that quiet, tender, non-demanding presence is where something stirs in her, where her guard drops, where her heart softens, and suddenly, what felt distant an hour ago starts to feel safe. Desire for many women begins long before the bedroom. It's in how safe she feels when she speaks, how curious you are when she shares, how you look at her when she's not performing, not trying, just being. So let me ask you something else. Have you ever noticed how she lights up when you do something small but meaningful, without being prompted? When you remember that story she told months ago and follow up? When you touch the small of her back while passing by in the kitchen, not to initiate sex, but just to remind her you're there? These aren't romantic cliches. These are intimacy cues. And here's the twist. Most men don't realize it's non-sexual intimacy that often reignites a woman's sexual desire. You think you need to seduce her with plans and performances. But what she's really longing for is presence. Not pressure. So many couples come to therapy with the same quiet ache. She says, I love him, but I feel alone. He says, but I'm here. I work hard. I don't cheat. I'm trying. Both are speaking truth, and yet both feel unseen, because love doesn't just live in grand gestures. It lives in the micro moments and the most powerful acts of emotional intimacy. They're not loud. They're not dramatic. They don't come with music swelling in the background. They are simple, but they are precise. They are the moments that whisper, I see you. I care. And I don't just want your body. I want your world. And when a woman feels emotionally desired, not just physically attractive, not just needed for her role, but wanted for who she is, that's when she begins to turn toward you again. That's when her voice softens, her laughter returns, her touch lingers longer. And so today, I want to take you into that world, the world of non-sexual intimacy, the world where emotional safety meets attraction, where everyday moments become emotional foreplay, where a woman doesn't just feel obligated to love, but inspired to. Because emotional intimacy isn't the absence of sexuality, it's the root of it. And in the next part of this conversation, I'll walk you through what those acts are, the often overlooked, quietly powerful things that emotionally turn women on without ever needing to touch her sexually first. There's a kind of heartbreak that doesn't happen in a moment. It unfolds slowly, quietly, like water dripping from a faucet you meant to fix but didn't. Not because you didn't care, but because you thought it would hold a little longer. You didn't notice the first signs. Or maybe you did, but you brushed them off. The longer silences, the shorter kisses, the way she turned away in bed instead of toward you. You told yourself she was tired, stressed, distracted, and maybe she was. But deep down, something else was happening. It wasn't about sex. It wasn't about arguing. It wasn't about one big dramatic betrayal. It was about all the small ways emotional intimacy began to slip through the cracks. She started feeling invisible in the relationship, not unloved, just unfelt. She still smiled, still made dinner, still said, I love you. But her heart was slowly packing its bags. That's the part that's hardest for most men to understand. She didn't fall out of love overnight. She simply stopped feeling like love lived here anymore. You see, women are taught to be understanding, to accommodate, to make things work. So when emotional intimacy starts fading, many women don't yell. They don't leave. They adjust. They become more self-sufficient, less expressive. They ask for less, expect less, hope less, and they start carrying their unmet needs like a secret they're too tired to share. Some women bury it under business, careers, parenting errands. Some bury it under silence. Others bury it in resentment that leaks out in sarcasm or distance. But underneath it all, the ache is the same. I miss being felt. I miss being known. I miss being reached for without having to ask. So many men think that because their partner isn't complaining, everything must be okay. But the absence of conflict isn't the presence of connection. It's often the beginning of emotional resignation. And from there, desire slowly vanishes. Not because she doesn't care. Not because she's not attracted to you, but because she doesn't feel emotionally invited anymore. Desire is not just physical for a woman. It's relational. It's contextual. It's about whether she feels like she matters beyond her roles, beyond her function, beyond her reliability. It's about whether she still feels cherished. Let's talk about what this looks like in real life. She starts hesitating when you initiate physical intimacy, not because she's rejecting you, but because she doesn't feel emotionally close. She's not turned on by the idea of sex, because something in her needs to be emotionally touched first. You feel hurt, confused, maybe even frustrated. You tell yourself, she's just not interested anymore. Or worse, she's changed. But what's really changed is the emotional ecosystem of your relationship. Where there used to be warmth, there's now habit. Where there used to be curiosity, there's now assumption. Where there used to be little moments of unexpected affection, there's now routine. And routine, while comfortable, is not intimacy. Comfort is what you have with a friend. Intimacy is what you cultivate with a lover. And somewhere along the line, many couples slip from one into the other without noticing, until one day, someone looks up and realizes they're emotionally lonely in the presence of the person they love most. It's a strange, almost shameful feeling, this loneliness in connection. Because on the surface, everything looks fine. You have a good life. You love each other. There's no abuse, no infidelity, no clear problem. And yet, something vital is missing. The spark, the aliveness, the feeling of being wanted, not just needed. This is the part where many women start to grieve silently. She doesn't know how to ask for more without sounding ungrateful. She doesn't want to hurt your feelings. She doesn't want to be too much. So she smiles. She says she's fine. She powers through. But inside, she's withering. Because for many women, emotional connection isn't a luxury. It's oxygen. It's how she breathes inside the relationship. And without it, she may not leave, but she will slowly retreat into herself and you. You might not even realize what's happening until the distance is undeniable. Until one day you reach for her and she doesn't reach back. You ask, what's wrong? And she says, I don't know. Or worse, nothing. And she means it. Not because there's nothing wrong, but because she's lived with the feeling so long it's become her new normal. This is the silent epidemic in so many long-term relationships. Not infidelity, not dramatic blow-ups, but emotional starvation. And it doesn't happen because you're a bad partner. It happens because no one teaches us how to maintain emotional intimacy over time. We think love, once declared, should sustain itself. But love is not a noun. It's a verb, a practice, a living thing. And like anything alive, it needs attention, especially the kind of attention that doesn't look like romance in the way we've been taught. Not flowers once a year, not a grand gesture on an anniversary, not scheduling sex on a calendar, but the small, consistent, non-sexual acts that say, I see you, I remember you, I'm still choosing you. These are the moments that make a woman feel emotionally safe. And when she feels emotionally safe, she softens, she opens, she leans in again. Because for her, safety is arousing, not in the way porn sells it, but in the way intimacy demands it. When she feels emotionally seen, she feels more like herself. And when she feels more like herself, she feels more capable of connecting, loving, desiring. But when she feels invisible, unacknowledged, emotionally lonely, desire shuts down. And once it shuts down, it's hard to get back unless we change the emotional environment. This is why non-sexual intimacy is so important. It's not a bonus. It's not a nice to have. It's the foundation. It's the way we make each other feel emotionally safe, emotionally chosen, emotionally wanted, without the pressure of sex. And here's the truth. When a woman feels emotionally held, desired without being rushed, seen without being judged, her body follows her heart. So many men think she needs to want me more. But the real question is, does she feel emotionally safe enough to want? Because if she doesn't, no amount of seduction will work. But if she does, if she feels emotionally connected, she will want you. Not just your touch, not just your loyalty, but your presence, your attention, your mind, your soul. And isn't that what you want too? To be loved, not just for what you do, but for who you are. To be wanted, not just for what you give, but for how you show up. To be chosen, not out of routine, but out of desire. That's what emotional intimacy creates. And that's what we're going to explore together. On the outside, Maya and Daniel had what looked like a stable marriage. 2 kids. A mortgage, shared holidays, the occasional date night when they remembered to book a sitter. They laughed sometimes, usually over something the kids said. They didn't fight often, at least not the kind of fights that leave holes in walls or force people to sleep in separate rooms. But there was an H in the middle of their home, not loud, not visible, persistent, like a fog that never fully lifted. Mia felt it most in the evenings. She'd put the kids to bed, walk into the living room and see Daniel on the couch, his face lit by the pale glow of his phone screen. She'd sit beside him. He'd glance up, smile briefly, and return to scrolling. He didn't mean to be distant. He didn't mean to ignore her. He just didn't notice how far they drifted. Mia used to speak up, used to ask, "Can we talk?" Or, "Will you put your phone down?" But over time, her requests were met with defensiveness, or worse, dismissiveness. He didn't mean it that way, but it was how it landed. Like her emotional needs were interruptions, not invitations. So she stopped asking, and he, unaware of the storm forming behind her silence, assumed everything was okay. They still had sex, but it felt mechanical, a routine, a duty. It didn't feel like intimacy. It felt like obligation wrapped in habit. He noticed her disinterest, but chalked it up to stress. She had so much on her plate. He figured she'd come around eventually. What he didn't know was that she'd already begun grieving the relationship. Not loudly, but privately. She missed feeling wanted, not just for her body, but for her thoughts, her laughter, her presence. She missed the man who used to notice when something was off, who used to hold her without expectation, who used to lean in instead of away. She didn't want grand gestures. She just wanted to feel like they still mattered. Then one afternoon, Mia sat on the edge of their bed, holding a basket of unfolded laundry, and felt a kind of sadness she couldn't name. It wasn't about the socks or the to-do list or the kids' dentist appointments. It was the loneliness, the kind that creeps in even when someone is sitting next to you every day. She didn't want to leave. She didn't want someone new. She just wanted them back. That night, she didn't say anything, just got into bed and turned to face the wall. But something shifted the next morning. Daniel came into the kitchen and saw her wiping down the counter with a distant look in her eyes. For once, he didn't walk past. He walked up behind her, put his hand gently on her lower back, just stood there for a moment. She didn't say anything, but she felt it. The stillness, the presence. And then he said, quietly, "You okay?" She hesitated, then shrugged. "Yeah, just tired." But he didn't move. He didn't say, "Okay, cool." He didn't go back to his phone. He just stayed, rubbed slow circles across her back. It wasn't sexual. It wasn't performative. It was real. She closed her eyes. It was the first time in weeks that she'd felt emotionally touched. Daniel didn't know exactly what he was doing. He just knew something had felt off for a while. And instead of fixing it with a joke or a plan or a solution, he decided, for once, to stay with it. Later that day, he sent her a voice message. Not a long one. Just, "I was thinking about you today." Not in a sexual way, just in a missing you kind of way. "I don't know if I've said it lately, but I really like the way your mind works. I miss hearing you talk about things that light you up." Mia cried in her car when she heard it, because that's what she'd been longing for. Not romance, but recognition. Not seduction, but emotional intimacy. And so began the smallest shift between them. Daniel started sitting with her in the evenings, even if just for 10 minutes, without his phone. He'd ask about her thoughts, not just her tasks. He started touching her without it being a prelude to sex, just a brush of his fingers on her arm while she cooked, or resting his hand over hers when they walked through the store. Mia, in turn, began to soften. She began to share again, not because she was asked, but because she felt safe. One night, a few weeks later, she leaned into him as they watched a movie. He looked surprised. "You okay?" he asked. She smiled. "Yeah," she said. "I just missed this." He wrapped his arm around her, pulled her close. There was no agenda, no countdown to anything sexual, but something in her stirred anyway, not out of obligation, but out of openness, desire, emotional safety. That night, when they did make love, it felt different, not because of the act, but because of the space it came from. It wasn't just two bodies meeting. It was two people remembering. That's what non-sexual intimacy does. It reminds the nervous system that love doesn't always ask for more. It sometimes just stays with what is. Psychologically, what Daniel had begun doing, without even naming it, was re-establishing emotional safety. In Gottman Institute language, he started turning toward her emotional bids instead of turning away. He began responding to her world, not just reacting to her behavior. Research shows that women in long-term relationships are most likely to experience desire when they feel emotionally attuned. This doesn't mean being perfect. It means being present. Maya's body had shut down not because she didn't love Daniel, but because her nervous system no longer felt emotionally held in his presence. Desire can't thrive in emotional loneliness, but it returns slowly, quietly, when connection is restored. Daniel didn't need to become someone else. He just needed to remember how to see her again. And when he did, something came alive in both of them. Because here's the part we rarely say out loud: men want to feel emotionally desired too. They want to know they matter beyond their usefulness. They want softness. They want to be chosen. But emotional intimacy is a dance. Someone has to take the first step. For Daniel, it started with a touch that asked for nothing. A moment of presence. A voice message that said, I remember who you are. And for Maya, it started with allowing herself to trust that the man she loved still existed beneath the layers of time, routine, and distraction. They didn't have to reinvent their marriage. They just had to reawaken it, moment by moment. And that's the power of non-sexual intimacy. It's not foreplay. It's not manipulation. It's not a strategy. It's the relationship. Because when a woman feels emotionally seen, she becomes emotionally open. And when she's emotionally open, her body follows. Not because she's fulfilling a role, but because she wants to. Emotional intimacy doesn't begin with words. It begins with attention. And not the kind of attention that asks, what can I get? But the kind that whispers, I'm here. I see you. I want to know what it's like to be you today. When a woman feels emotionally seen, something opens in her that is far more powerful than lust. It's trust. And trust is the soil where her desire begins to grow again. So how do you build that? What are the simple, everyday acts of non-sexual intimacy that create safety, connection, and eventually emotional arousal? Let's begin with the most misunderstood one, presence without pressure. So many men approach intimacy like a staircase. First a compliment, then a hug, then a kiss, then the bedroom. It's linear, goal-oriented, and unintentionally transactional. But for many women, desire blooms in circular spaces, not linear ones. She wants to feel held without an expectation, touched without being assessed, talked to without being managed. That's why the most powerful method you can offer her is presence that asks for nothing in return. You sit next to her on the couch. You put your phone down. You notice her face. You ask a question, not about logistics, but about her. Not, did you schedule the car service, but what's been heavy for you lately? Or even gentler, what's something you haven't said out loud this week? These aren't dramatic questions. They're doorways, and you don't need to rush through them. If she shares, listen like you're learning her all over again, not to fix, not to respond, just to receive her. That in itself is erotic, because eroticism isn't only sexual. It's the energy of aliveness, of being fully felt. When you are truly present with her, not distracted, not scanning her for cues of what comes next, but rooted in the moment, she feels safe. She softens. Her nervous system quiets. Her emotional body starts to unfold. And in that stillness, something begins to stir. Not because you touched her body, but because you touched her world. Now let's talk about the second act. Non-sexual physical touch. Touch is one of the most powerful tools of intimacy, but only when it's used with reverence, not as a shortcut to arousal. We often associate touch with desire, but when a woman feels emotionally disconnected, touch can feel intrusive, even manipulative. So what if you offered touch without any sexual expectation? You walk past her in the kitchen and place your hand gently on her back. You reach for her hand during a walk, not because you want to lead, but because you want to join. You kiss her forehead when she's stressed. You lay beside her at night and put your hand over her heart without moving it anywhere else. These moments may seem small, but to her they speak volumes. They say, I love you as you are, even when your body isn't ready. They say, I want connection, not just release. They say, I'm here with you, not just for what I want from you. And when she feels that kind of touch, her body begins to trust again. Touch that asks for nothing is often the doorway to touch that wants everything. Now, let's go deeper. Emotional validation is one of the most arousing forms of communication because it removes the mask. When she says, I feel so overwhelmed, and you say, you're just stressed, she hears, your emotions are inconvenient. But when she says, I feel overwhelmed, and you pause, breathe, and respond with, that makes sense. You've been holding a lot. She hears, I see you, and I'm not afraid of your truth. Validation doesn't mean agreement. It means acknowledgement. And acknowledgement is the bridge to vulnerability, because most women aren't turned on by perfection. They're turned on by presence. By a partner who can hold the fullness of their emotional life without judgment or fear. And here's something men rarely hear. When you validate her pain, you become safer. And when you're safer, you become sexier, not in a superficial way, but in a deeply emotional, relational way. Because now, her body is no longer protecting her, it's welcoming you. This is why the foundation of all non-sexual intimacy is not technique, but tone. The tone of your voice when she walks into the room. The tone of your silence when she's struggling. The tone of your gaze when she isn't performing. She notices it all. Not because she's overly sensitive, but because women are neurologically wired to attune to emotional tone. It's how they've survived. It's how they've learned to protect their energy, their worth, their hearts. So if you want to awaken her desire, pay attention to how you show up, not just what you do. Is your presence spacious or pressured? Is your listening deep or distracted? Is your affection grounding or goal-oriented? Because when your presence becomes a safe place, she becomes emotionally available. And when she becomes emotionally available, she becomes sensually alive. Let's not forget the most underrated intimacy act of all, remembering. You remember the story she told you about her favorite teacher in high school. You bring it up months later and ask, what do you think she'd say if she saw you now? You remember she gets nervous at the dentist, so you text her a few minutes before, you're brave. I'm thinking about you. You remember she mentioned she hasn't felt creative lately, and a week later, you leave a blank sketchbook on her side of the bed. These moments don't require poetry. They require presence. And presence is what creates trust. When she feels emotionally remembered, she feels emotionally wanted. And when she feels emotionally wanted, she wants. Not because she feels pressure to perform, but because she feels permission to open. This is the difference between intimacy and transaction. Intimacy is not about getting, it's about knowing. And when a woman feels known, not in a controlling way, but in an attuned way, she blossoms. Suddenly, the woman who was distant is smiling again. The woman who avoided touch is initiating it. The woman who was closed is now curious. You didn't win her back through strategy. You invited her back through safety. And she returned not because she had to, but because she wanted to. That is the essence of non-sexual intimacy. It doesn't demand, it invites, it doesn't perform, it listens, it doesn't fix, it holds. And that holding is what makes her emotionally aroused. So if you're wondering where to start with one touch that asks for nothing, one question that invites something real, one moment of presence that says, I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere. That's how you bring her back, not just to you, but to herself. Sometimes the most powerful change doesn't come from fixing, it comes from feeling your own longing, feeling her distance, feeling the ache of disconnection, not as something to resent, but as something to respond to with tenderness. If something stirred in you during this conversation, a memory, a regret, a moment of hope, pause with that. Because emotional intimacy doesn't grow in urgency, it grows in stillness, in the quiet decision to begin again, not because you failed, but because you're ready to see more clearly now. Maybe you've realized how long it's been since you looked at her and really saw her. Maybe you're sitting beside her right now and you want to reach for her, but not like before. This time with no agenda, just an invitation. I miss us. I want to know you again. Or maybe you're realizing how much you long to feel emotionally desired, to be met not just as a partner, but as a human being with your own quiet needs. Let this be that moment. The one where you don't rush ahead or scroll away. The one where you stop and ask yourself, which part of this message touched me the most? Was it the moment she cried in her car after hearing a voice message that made her feel seen? Was it the memory of brushing hands in the kitchen and realizing you missed that kind of closeness? Was it the ache of knowing that love still lives here, but it needs a light turned on again? Share it in the comments if you feel safe enough to. Not because you owe anything, but because someone else might need to hear your story too. Connection begins when one person dares to go first. And if this message found its way into your heart, if it made you pause, breathe, or reflect, please consider subscribing to this channel. Not for the algorithm, not even for me, but for you. For the version of you that wants to love more honestly, connect more deeply and show up, not with perfection, but with presence. Every week, we explore the emotional levels of relationships. The parts we don't talk about at dinner parties, the silences, the second chances, the ways we come home to one another after drifting apart, and I would be honored to walk with you on that journey. So subscribe, stay close, bring your tenderness, bring your questions, bring your hope. And if you know someone who needs this message, someone who's standing at the edge of emotional distance and wondering how to cross the bridge, send this to them, not as advice, but as an offering. Before I go, I want to say this thank you. Thank you for caring about love enough to listen. Thank you for wanting to show up more deeply. Thank you for remembering that emotional intimacy isn't something you're either good at or not. It's something you practice. Every touch, every question, every quiet moment of sitting beside someone you love and choosing not to rush them is a thread in the tapestry of lasting desire. So take one step today. Maybe it's a hand on her back with no words. Maybe it's a voice message that says, I still remember who you are. Maybe it's just sitting still long enough to hear the sound of your own longing. Whatever it is, start there. I'll see you in the next video. And until then, stay tender, stay curious, and never forget love is not a destination, it's a practice. Always.